Between 1346 and 1353, half of the entire population of Europe died. 200 million people, wiped out in a matter of just 7 years. A single bacterium called Yersinia pestis triggered this devastation. It hitched a ride on a microscopic flea, carried across the continent by rats on trading ships. This manuscript captures the reality on the ground. Society simply broke down. Priests stopped giving last rites. Parents abandoned sick children. The living were completely overwhelmed by bodies piling in the streets. For those who survived those 7 years, there was no scientific explanation for the suffering. They genuinely believed they were living through the literal end of civilization. Now, imagine a different timeline. The trading vessels arrive in 1346. The rats scatter onto the docks, but the bacteria never spreads. It is natural to assume that if those 200 million people survive, history simply continues on a more prosperous, peaceful track. But the evidence suggests a very different outcome. In this timeline, the medieval world remains locked in a stagnant, oppressive nightmare. This map of 14th century Europe shows a continent that had outgrown its food supply. By 1300, the population had reached a tipping point, with borders locked and almost no new land left to clear for crops. This population was locked into a strict hierarchy. A tiny fraction of lords held absolute ownership, while the vast majority were peasants with no leverage. Because labor was abundant, it had no value. Lords extracted wealth without ever offering wages. Above the lords, the Catholic Church maintained absolute authority. They dictated political governance and daily life, strictly controlling all acceptable intellectual thought. With primitive farming techniques pushed to the absolute limits of the land, any bad harvest triggered immediate starvation. The continent was already drifting toward a cycle of inevitable wide-scale famine. Without a scion disruption, this oppressive socio-religious hierarchy remains unbroken for centuries to come. Return to the real timeline. The plague hits, and roughly 60% of the population suddenly vanishes. This created an immediate labor vacuum. As you can see by the shifting scale, with a severe scarcity of people left to do the work, the balance of power shifted to the survivors overnight. Peasants suddenly possessed something incredibly valuable: their labor. For the first time, they could demand wages. The feudal hold on the working class cracked. This forced a transfer of wealth upward, from the lords to the commoners. Workers accumulated capital, forming a new tier in society, the merchant class. The economic freedom required to build a middle class was directly funded by mass death. This decentralized wealth allowed merchants to fund independent art and science, fueling the explosion of human thought we call the Renaissance. At the same time, the Catholic Church faced a credibility crisis. People had watched their families die while priests promised that prayers would save them. When the dying didn't stop, the illusion of the Church's total supremacy fractured. That loss of faith planted the seeds for the Protestant Reformation. It opened the door to religious freedom and the idea that church and state could exist apart from one another. Without the Black Death breaking both the economic and religious monopolies, the infrastructure required for modern scientific reasoning simply would not have been built. If you trace the roots of your individual rights, your ability to speak freely, and your economic mobility, the lines lead back to the year 1353. Modern democracy, human rights, and technological science sit squarely on top of the graves of 200 million people. Acknowledging that data doesn't justify the suffering of those victims. What it does is expose exactly how terrifying and messy the mechanics of history really are. It forces you to look at the facts and decide if catastrophic human suffering is the mandatory price for societal progress. Could humanity have eventually found a peaceful way out of the Dark Ages? Let me know what you think below.